Welcome to the Sleeping Barber podcast.
We're so excited to have Tom Roach, the VP of Strategy at JellyFish, which is a marketing performance company, on the show today talking about what marketers don't know, including things like, is there value in advertising? What's the point of purpose? ROAS and ROI? Stick around. This is going to be a great show.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Mark Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
And we're back with another show, and we're excited to have with us Tom Roach. Tom is the VP of Strategy at JellyFish. And for those who don't know, JellyFish is a marketing performance company with over 2,500 employees around the globe. Now, they've extensive experience with Google, Amazon, Salesforce, but likely the most impressive element is the range of customers that range from CPR right to high tech. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to be on.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Both of us are really excited.
We're really excited. So the theme of today's episode will really revolve around, what marketers don't know. And, we've been fans of your content for quite some time, and you have incredibly well-researched and thoughtful posts. And we'd like to explore a lot of those various posts and topics, if you will, just to kind of get a unique perspective as a practitioner and also as a student of the marketing discipline. Now, think we could... Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to say that's very, very kind of you to say. I feel like there's a lot of kind of pretty low value opinion out there, and so I like to make sure the things that I write are of value, it's slightly different from what other people might say, or look slightly more deeply at a topic that gets ignored sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, in my feed, honestly, it happens frequently where there's somebody that references something you've written, and even if it's like a thought leadership piece on another topic, they'll often reference your stuff. So it's great. I'm really excited to have you here for this.
Yeah, and we thought that maybe we just start with, maybe this is what is it called? A softball question or an underhanded question. I don't know. But actually, is there value in advertising? I know it may sound very open-ended, but the reality is I think there are sometimes these conflicting views that you keep seeing online, and we'd love to get your take on that.
It's an extraordinary question in a way, isn't it? Because you've got a $600-700 billion a year industry, and you've got huge tech companies like Google, Facebook, obviously Meta, Apple now, even Netflix, and Amazon is now an enormous advertising business. So you've got these enormous businesses that the biggest brands that exist today, the biggest companies that exist today, all engaged in advertising or making advertising or being part of this world in distributing it somehow. And yet the question remains, is it a valuable exercise? It's kind of insane that it might be a question, but we, I mean, if you Google the topic, is advertising dead? The amount of terrible articles by really reputable companies that are asking this question constantly. And it's often the big consultancies that say the question. Of course, what they really mean is advertising as we know it dead? Is advertising like TV advertising dead? So often there's a kind of qualifier, and it's a bit of a clickbait question. But the fact that these people ask this question repeatedly again and again and again, and it goes back, I don't know, at least 20 years, probably since the arrival of the big tech platforms. I think the repetition of the question, is it dead? Is it dying? Has really somehow impacted our perceptions of it as a business, which is crazy because it's in a way never been bigger. A year or so ago, it never looked healthier. I mean, I think some of the impact on some of the tech companies to right now looks a bit like they're wavering slightly, but as an industry, I think there's some data that says it's like 1% of the US GDP is always historically spent on advertising. And so it's an incredibly stable business. So the notion that somehow it would not work is baffling to me. The other thing I think coming from a UK perspective is that we have a very long-standing tradition, really, or sort of legacy that goes back to about 1980, where we have a body called the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, the IPA, who have been collecting advertising case studies since 1980. And there's now somewhere between 1,500, 2,000 of these case studies, all proving again and again and again the power and value and commercial value of advertising. So the question to a UK sort of ad strategist like me with a kind of sideline in marketing effectiveness is slightly like weird, but I understand the question and I hear it repeatedly. But we have a tremendous body of work now that proves the value of advertising. It shouldn't be a question. But I totally understand your reasons for asking it.
It's funny. We just came off the heels of a Super Bowl where they were selling ad space for $7 million for 30 seconds. Yeah. So I would argue it's pretty alive and well when there's advertisers willing to spend.
Well, every Super Bowl, right. Every Super Bowl, there's the same question. And I saw Mark Ritson posted an article that he'd written in 2019 saying, in every Super Bowl it comes around, is it valuable to do a Super Bowl commercial? And of course, the answer is sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It depends. And, there is a whole load of crypto advertisers from the last Super Bowl, many of whom don't exist anymore. Yeah. And so in that case, clearly it wasn't valuable to them. But of course, one TV commercial doesn't make or break a business. It's all sorts of other reasons why businesses will succeed or fail. But in each of those individual cases, a load of people made an assessment that it was worth spending money on, and they do it repeatedly. And so it's a bit crazy to me. I appreciate, of course, that there's a particular question with the Super Bowl, which is it really worth that much? Yeah. And it is only worth that much if you continue it, if it's a long-term commitment, if you harvest all the demand that you're generating through the fame and awareness and talkability that you're generating through the TV commercial. So if you're harvesting that demand in clever, smart, often kind of technological ways these days, then of course it can be worth it. I sometimes doubt, though, that the way in which some of those advertisers go about it is particularly efficient, but that's a different question.
You earlier you mentioned the IPA, and there was something I stumbled across. I don't think I saw it in your articles particularly, but there was something I saw about strong versus weak force of advertising, and it was talking about the weak force of advertising being more prevalent in the UK, whereas the US thinks is more centered around the strong force of advertising. I don't know if you're aware of that, or just if you can comment on.
Do you mean the belief in the power of the strong force versus? I mean, should we cover kind of the basics of this? I mean, it's a debate that goes back, I don't know, like a century, and you can see and I suppose in the US UK example, you might see it as a kind of hard sell, soft sell in a way. Which is historically UK has been a bit more into the sort of softer sell type of advertising, and that's probably related to this debate. But I think there is it's a very common mistake, particularly these days, and it's again I think being perpetuated by the way in which the ad tech platforms sell their inventory. They like to believe that advertising is somehow a strong force on sales, and the kind of language we use, like consideration, conversion, that kind of language about the role of advertising is I think suggestive of a belief that advertising is a very powerful force. Now, most of the evidence we actually have around how advertising works suggests it's a very weak force. It's just something incrementally, little by little, people are surrounded by lots of little nudges and moments and touch points and things that just rub off on them gently, and that is how you build an impression of a brand and a set of memories for a brand. And over time, somebody is slightly more likely when they fall into the market, when they're thinking about buying something, they're slightly more likely to think about your brand, and they're slightly more likely for your brand to come to mind first, and they're slightly more likely to buy it. So the ways in which advertising actually works tend to be much more just very, very softly, but the way in which people like the tech platforms, and probably before that, the original, like the first agencies, direct mail agencies, when you talk about, when you look at the history of some of the great characters in advertising, they tend to be very forceful, very kind of powerful salespeople of their particular approach. So whether it's David Ogilvy or Rossa Reeves or people like Claude Hopkins going way back into the early 20th century, they were people that had or many of them were people that had a particularly kind of vociferous perspective on the power of advertising. And so they would write about things and they would invent ideas like the unique selling proposition that sounds like a very powerful and strong thing. But the reality of how communication actually works on the mind and on the brain tends to be a much softer, much more long-term thing than I think we tend to give it credit for. It's not very macho to believe in the weak force. It's not. It doesn't sound very compelling, and so it's naturally the idea that advertising is a strong force just sounds like it's a better sell than advertising. Oh no, advertising is a weak force. Imagine setting up an agency and positioning it around the weakness of your product. It's not going to happen. So I think it's a really interesting subject, but ultimately, it's a weak force. I think the platforms are beginning to realize this, and the ways in which they're having to adjust the way they do business because of the changes to the way tracking works these days. The possibility of claiming that I showed somebody an ad, they acted on it, they clicked here, they bought. The fact that it's less possible to it's less easy to prove that chain of events these days than it appeared to be 5-10 years ago, means that the big ad tech people are beginning to have to accept the broad reach, mass reach communication is actually pretty effective, but it just does it in a slightly different way to the way they've been talking about it previously. So long answer.
Well, so I know we have a framework of questions here, but you just opened up Pandora's box there. And I'm
sorry about that.
No, and I'm debating, like, do we talk about that for a little bit, because I think we are noticing a shift, right? When we think about right now advertisers today, or even if you think about 5-6 years ago, Mark and I have been guilty of this as well. The overinvestment, looking at the performance side, the digital marketing, it kind of gave us something extremely tangible as marketers, not only to go back and combat the C-suite, to kind of give insights and kind of earn that seat at the table. But now you're seeing, Airbnb, Adidas. Recently, there was another article of another brand that, say, we lifted our spending on the performance marketing side and kind of reinvested on brand, broad reach awareness, et cetera. And, they're seeing, a record revenue numbers or profits coming in. So again, I don't know what my question is here, but are you seeing this a lot as well too? Are we at a point right now where we're appreciating more of the art behind advertising than maybe we were in the last, 6-7 years?
I think we probably are now. I think there's a particular moment in time where we're post-COVID. There's recession, economies are looking kind of wobbly, cost of living crisis, and what that means is that loads of brands are reassessing how they do things. And I mean, right. I asked this question of our media strategy and planning capability recently on Slack. I said, what of the clients you've got right now, how many do you see are spending more, spending less, spending more on brand, spending more on performance? And actually, it was really even. Across our client base, we can see a kind of pragmatic, realistic assessment based on the category you're in. That if you're in a category with some growth right now, or you're having to justify prices because prices are going up, right, then you might be spending a bit more on brand advertising. If you're in a category where there just is less demand, you might be spending a little bit less on performance because there's less demand to hoover up. So there's a kind of I think it's horses for courses, as we say in the UK. It's a mixture of different things. But I do think the broader kind of narrative, I think, is that some of the really big advertisers that had maybe got too seduced by some of the kind of the immediacy of what, well, let's call it, performance can offer, have rebalanced. And I think it's I don't think it's ever black and white. I don't think anybody's going from 100% one thing to 100% another thing, and that would be wrong anyway. I think people are just finding their level. There was we see a lot of brands, particularly kind of not necessarily startups, but let's call them scale-ups, who have found it easier to grow initially, at least, through using performance marketing, and that's so easily accessible to small businesses, to small brands. That what really the ad tech people have done is they've made accessible advertising, the tools of advertising, to a whole range and size of businesses that it wasn't really that available and accessible to before. So the barriers of entry to using advertising have massively come down.
That's true.
So loads of small businesses, smaller companies using more performance activity. They get to a certain level, and then they look around and they reach a kind of plateau. We call it the performance plateau. And then they have to make some big decisions about what they do next. And they have to. I wrote about this in a piece recently, where you really have to kind of unthink everything you know and believe about advertising. You have to rethink your philosophies about it, and what you do, the kind of tactics you use, the kind of creativity that you deploy, whether you use agencies or not. You need to re-educate your CFO and your commercial, your finance partners internally, because they will have different expectations about the speed with which things will return. And you have to rethink the way you measure things. So there's a kind of a critical moment that can last quite a long time for certain businesses, where they kind of reconfigure what they do and what they think about how to operate. And this doesn't mean just like suddenly doing a load of TV advertising or some out of home or something, but it can mean kind of fundamentally changing your approach to it all, and that can take some time. So there's a kind of different kind of size businesses will be on a different kind of maturity and a different journey, I think.
There's for a lot of companies, that especially for people who don't believe in any value of an advertising, they'll often reference a Bezos quote about advertising the price you pay for having unremarkable thinking. And then Elon Musk, and they don't advertise. Arguably, they don't advertise. But then you turn around and you mentioned before that, like Amazon, they advertise a lot, and so there's this contradiction. I think sometimes people pick and choose the sound bites that.
Right. Well, that Bezos quote was 2009, I think, and actually. I mean, if you've got people quoting that, I mean, they're 14 years behind the times, and they haven't noticed that Amazon have become, I think, one of the largest, if not the world's largest advertiser, and they've become one of the 3 or 4 biggest advertising businesses in the world. So they are, actually the story of Amazon is one of, it's similar kind of journey. They obviously were small. They from the very beginning. 2009, they were probably pretty big, but they learned the hard way through their own data, probably that advertising did work, and an incredibly data-driven company. So we have no reason to believe that they haven't made it from a data-driven perspective, as opposed to some sort of they've just changed their minds. Yeah. But Bezos has changed his mind based on their own data, and they built a phenomenal business in all sorts of ways. And now they're a Super Bowl advertiser, and they do some of the best TV advertising out there. So that is a totally pro advertising story. And in fact, probably I'd say the best demonstration of the power of advertising there is out there, for all the reasons I've given. They're a tremendous advertiser. Tesla is a different story. Elon Musk, I think, it depends how you define advertising. When you look at Musk's view that they don't advertise, is it true that they don't advertise? It is, if you define advertising very, very narrowly as paid advertising communication in media. If you define it more broadly as the monetization of attention, they absolutely advertise. I mean, Tesla.
Yeah.
I mean, sending a Tesla into space and getting, I don't know how many millions of people to watch it live. That's advertising to me. I don't know if you know, it's a definitional thing. So he absolutely does believe in advertising, just in a broader way. I think that Tesla, of course, they're going to learn, I think, probably the hard way that they will need to advertise, because they were in a category of one. They had first mover advantage. They became, they had tremendous word of mouth. If you've got, in the car business, if you've got cars on the roads, they get attention. And so there is a fame and awareness that is driven that way through having product on the streets. And of course, it's a luxury brand that has its own dynamics around, the sort of status that it can give you. And so there's a word of mouth thing that kicks in. But they're in a category now where they've got some very competitive brands that they're competing with. And so they're going to have to make some decisions around whether that's a belief that they continue to espouse or not. And I'm pretty sure that they'll decide that advertising is worth it when their sales begin to really dip. I haven't seen the numbers, but I'm sure they will. Yeah.
Kind of segueing into the next related topic is you had written an open letter to CMOs about advocating for brand building and the benefits of it. Something Elon Musk might read at some point. From that perspective, though, like, can you talk about the value of brand and the value of brand building? Like, why? Yeah, it's always almost always. If you can check me on this too, it feels like in our history, it's kind of like, yeah, we want this, and it's a cool side project. But then when push comes to shove, they're like, cut it.
Yeah, it's a complex area. I think I'm guilty of this, and lots of people are talking about brand building as essentially brand building advertising. But I will tend to end up defining it as that. I mean, of course, there's many other ways you can build a brand other than advertising and spending on paid media to do it through just having some beautiful packaging or a great experience,
customer experience.
But I tend to talk about it as advertising. But yeah, that piece was, I think it was about 2017, 18. It was really written out of frustration. And it's still a frustration today that businesses tend, and particularly the finance people within businesses, and often CEOs as well, tend to underestimate and undervalue the importance of their brand, and therefore underestimate the importance of investing in it. I think somebody did a meta-analysis of different categories and saw that the brand value of businesses was on average about 20% of the market capitalization of companies, and 20% is a huge amount when your business is worth billions or even trillions these days. So I guess the question is, are there lots of businesses who are investing less than 20% of their available resources in their brand? And I'm pretty certain that's generally true, that people are investing far less than 20% in building their brands, and yet it's commonplace to believe that people are a company's biggest asset. It's not commonplace to understand the importance of the brand in a business. So it was a frustration, really, and from working in agencies at the time, which were predominantly brand advertising companies, and feeling like this was a part of the kind of the marketing communications mix, or the total expenditure of a company that wasn't being invested in. It also, I think, was a frustration based on my perception at the time that too much was being spent on, let's call it, performance marketing, performance advertising. Yeah, and so the more short-term stuff. And it's that as I've moved to a different kind of company, I can see the benefits and a more blended kind of approach, and I talk about Bothism So the importance of doing both. Yeah. So if we want to get back to what actually is the value of a brand, it's and brand building, it's really the mechanisms and processes by which you generate memories, and brand memories are the way in which you get chosen when people are deciding what to buy. So I see no other mechanism really to generate essentially base sales or future demand than having a strong set of memories and associations with your company, your brand, so that when people are choosing it, they think of you. That's essentially all we're talking about. But the fact that that's so simple and so obvious, and all of the data that anybody ever kind of looks at and analyzes says you need to be thought of, and you need to be well thought of, and you need to be thought of as good value in order to be chosen. It's kind of obvious, and yet I think that we find it hard in our industry to persuade some of our partners and help CMOs persuade their colleagues that this is an important endeavor, which is kind of crazy, because it's surely everybody wants strong sales, everybody wants future sales, everyone wants strong demand. It shouldn't be a question. It should just be part and parcel of what we do. I mean, nobody would say we shouldn't have factories or we should have people. It's just to me, it's like completely obvious that it's a requirement. I know we get into debates about then how you allocate your expenditure versus, on different elements of the brand building mix. And then you get into debates about short and long term and how quickly you want to drive sales, and your expectations of return on investment, etc., which are, again, different questions.
Yeah. Do you think as marketers we do ourselves a disservice though? Because I think sometimes what happens is like we paint ourselves into the corner that, the brand is literally just the ads that we put out. So then executives, C-level really just kind of expect that of the department. But we had Mary Kiriakidis, a global thought leader at Kantar, and she's talking about, I think, and Mark, check me here on the stats, I think it was like only 25% of brand building is actually happening through the ads, where 75% is happening across all the other different touch points in an organization. But I think as marketers, like we just tend to focus on the one area and try to make that like maybe the biggest part. But the reality is it's like you can affect brand. And that's why I think the definition of brand sometimes in organizations is what's being missed, where marketing can influence multiple touch points.
I totally agree, and I think the specificity of that and understanding the relative contribution of the different levers within brand building, I think, and I'm as guilty as anybody, I think, of not being specific about what we mean by brand building, and that's I think that's a really important point. I mean, the word itself is problematic. It's a very fuzzy idea. It gets used differently. It can be. So in some companies, you end up with a whole department of people who are essentially the brand police, who are kind of making sure there's global consistency and there's a brand guidelines book, and that everybody in different markets is paying attention to these rules and guidelines. And I don't think, I mean, if your perspective in a big global company is the brand people are those people, then maybe you don't value it. Maybe it's a fairly kind of niche sort of operational kind of exercise. If you're I think some I mean, like you look at Apple, they're incredible at that, of course, in this consistency, but they seem to really understand how the importance of brand on every touch point. They do brand advertising. All of their more promotional communication absolutely builds the brand. I mean, I think it's, I'm not one of these people that believes that short-term sales activation communication can't build a brand. I think it's really important to try. I think it's, of course, it's a team sport and all of this stuff needs to work together. but I believe that some of that shorter stuff, it's really important that it isn't brand damaging, of course, and lots of discounting price activity can be brand damaging, kind of undermine your brand efforts to build value in a brand. And so it's important to get those things in balance. But I'm not a subscriber of kind of don't ever do any of the short-term stuff. I think it's really important because so often, some of that stuff gets a higher return on investment. It's a way of buying you time for your brand building activity to kick in, which does tend to work on a longer term basis. I come back to this theme again and again, which is about balance. It's about both.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because it's not an either or thing. It should be both. Like you don't have to make a choice to do one or the other. You can do both.
Yeah,
whatever your budget size is. I mean, you have $1, 50 cents on one, 50 cents on the other.
Yeah, and of course there are examples where businesses are in real dire straits and they have to pull themselves out of that hole. And I've heard people recently. In fact, somebody I was talking to the other day from a company that was a D2C mattress brand that had a great COVID, had loads of sales, but then post-COVID things didn't go so well. They actually found themselves doing too much brand building, and they were doing stuff that actually would be paying back now. Unfortunately, the business doesn't exist anymore, so they actually needed to be doing more short-term stuff. Yeah. So it's never black and white. It needs to be something you look at, in the kind of realities of the business. I mean, lots of kind of startups, scale-ups, tech businesses talk about how the runway they've got, and it's really important to understand that if you're particularly on the agency side where these things aren't often that clear to you, just how important it is if a company's only got 6 months of funding left. There's not very much point in doing something that will pay back in a year or 2 years' time. And so having that, trying to persuade a CMO that they should be doing a Superbowl ad when the business is in dire straits, that doesn't make sense.
So we just had a couple audio hookups there. But we're talking about building a brand, and so V and I have talked about this a lot. We go for bike rides, and then we sit on our bikes, and we're like, "What about this?" And as I'm sucking wind, trying to catch up to him on a hill, then he'll be waiting at the top of the hill for me, going, "Yeah, here's what I think." So, but when it comes to building brand, like the distinctiveness versus difference thing, we had a really good conversation with Mary. We've talked also to the Ehrenberg Bass, Nicole specifically about this, and I would love to hear your take on it because I just find it a fascinating debate about, especially when it comes to brand building.
So you're up there, top of the hill. You're on your giant, and you're on your specialized. And tell me, what's the difference between those two things? There may be some very, very minor differences, but ultimately they're kind of the same.
They're kind of the same.
And so the kind of technical distinction or difference between difference and distinctiveness is differentiation in the Ehrenberg Bass Institute's perspective is a genuine product difference, a meaningful difference in the product. And their belief is that that's sometimes possible, but less prevalent than in most categories than you might imagine. And distinctiveness in the Ehrenberg Bass or Bar and Sharp or Jenny Romaniuk definition is looking like yourself. So looking recognizably like yourself as a brand. So there is a difference between the two things. They are related, but I think they get confused. I think differentiation has been historically overvalued, over kind of emphasized as an important thing for businesses to have, when in reality it's fairly common for the first entrant in a new category to be a bit different, plainly. But then as other people arrive into that category, their differences get eroded, and it becomes harder for that product or that service to retain its genuine difference as loads of new entrants enter the category. And maybe you've got 20, 30 brands in a category, and it's really hard to be different in that instance. And with technological kind of advancements and innovation, it's very hard to maintain a genuine difference. So what you then fall back onto, so you might start trying to be different, you then might realize you're going to have to be distinctive. It's going to be really hard to get your position, get yourself into people's minds in a busy category if you don't look different, if you don't look distinctive and don't look recognizably like yourself. And I guess the classic example probably is Coke and Pepsi. Coke's a great example of this because, in fact, they probably the brief that they wrote themselves for the classic iconic bottle was essentially give us distinctiveness. It was something like, I'm going to get the words wrong, but it was design us a bottle that will be recognized as distinctly Coke, even if it's lying broken on the floor. Yeah. And that bottle is incredibly distinctive. But is the brown liquid that's caramel flavor or whatever the flavor is, Coke, is that significantly different from Pepsi? No. It's very, very similar. It's just they have a different set of distinctive assets. So the thing that the Edinburgh Bass Institute always emphasizes the importance of distinctiveness. They don't deny the potential and possibility of difference. They just believe that it's harder to hold on to difference and easier to own distinctiveness. And that's, if you look at a brand like Salesforce, wow, they're doing an incredible job in a space that has historically not valued looking distinctive. And they are incredibly ownable and memorable as a result of all the work they're doing to really make their brand stand out. And I spent a lot of my kind of formative years in the agency BBH, funny enough, their whole philosophy about brand building advertising is about distinctiveness. They talk about when the world zigs zag, but even they confuse distinctiveness and difference, and they talk about the power of difference. But what they really mean is the power of distinctiveness, I think. So I think most agencies sell some kind of, or creative agencies at least, sell some kind of proposition based on being different or distinctive or disruptive, standing out, owning something, owning an idea, creating a set of distinctive assets that are ownable and are yours. And that's absolutely my kind of philosophy too, because loads of agencies believe it. Doesn't mean it's not true.
So can organizations compete with just being distinctive?
It's a really good question. It's a very live question. I've got with a client right now who don't have a particularly different product. We're having to give them a creative idea and a set of assets that are distinctive. We want the idea that we're going to give them to inspire their people to come up with more different products, because we do believe that there's an important need for them to be able to have something that is a bit different. Right. But I think you can, I think if you're in it can't harm, can it, to have difference? But I think it's essential to be distinctive. I think you can get by if you're distinctive only. But I think you probably do better if you're both distinctive and different.
I mean, just going back to the example of the specialized versus, I forget
the giant
you mentioned, the giant. Yeah. I mean, that's a good example. Even the Coke, Pepsi and pick any Tesla versus, one of the new EVs that are out there. Like Tesla was super distinctive and, at one point, I'm sure the original bike was super distinctive. Different. Yeah. But as the market then catches up, you've got all these things that are very similar. In bikes, I mean, V and I ride, exactly. But my bike is a bit older now. And so it's fine. It has wheels and has gears and all that kind of stuff. But the technology every year keeps ratcheting up. And so these companies end up, what might have been super distinctive or different at one point, like say carbon fiber frames, is now adopted by everyone. So that's not really something sustainable.
It becomes an arms race. It becomes hygiene. If one of those brands fell behind and was way off innovation wise, it would affect their brand and it would be a problem for them. So I think it probably becomes table stakes, particularly in categories which have very fast innovation cycles, like you see it in the bike category. A tiny bit of innovation does seem to get adopted quite quickly. I think it shouldn't be a debate. It's weirdly become one. I think it can be a bit semantic. I think you can lose people. There was a thing a couple of years ago. I don't know how big Mark Ritson Bar and Shop are in amongst your listeners, but they tended to have this big debate about distinctiveness versus difference, and it's a pointless debate, because I think we should all come together and fight sameness. That's the enemy, not difference or distinctiveness. We should all be constantly wary of just being the same as everyone, and finding ways to be distinctive or different is basically ganging up on sameness. I think, it's a brilliant trick you can play if you're an agency side and you've got a client that doesn't really want to buy anything particularly stand out or impactful. Just show them the category, show them the sea of sameness in their category. Every category has a sea of sameness, and it has its rules that everybody seems to stick to, and tends towards everything looking the same. And it's a great way to get a marketer who's a bit safe in their approach to realize that they actually need to be doing communication that has real standout. It's just to put everything on one board and say, look, this is a waste of money if we just look like this stuff. And it works in any category. You can see it in the car category. I did it with mobile phone handsets recently. All these big billboards, black billboard, phone in the center. It just looked the same. So it's just no point. It's a waste of money.
Like, spinning off of that idea, one of the things that people, I think, lean towards is purpose as a way to create difference, it seems. But then you look at all these different purpose statements, and there's so much sameness even there.
Yeah, I'm sort of glad that I feel like the purpose debate has sort of moved on. I mean, it's been one in the industry probably, 5 years or so. I wrote about it in 2019, 2020. My perspective on purpose is that it's probably a powerful way to engage your people. It's probably important for businesses these days to do some good, but I don't believe most big businesses that claim to be purposeful actually are. I think it tends to be a bit of a lie, and it tends to be a sort of marketing exercise. And if you're doing purposeful ads, you're probably doing it wrong. I think there are really important, good businesses that have got a real purpose baked in, and they start that way, and they're doing some good in the world. But if you're a manufacturer of soap powder, by all means, make sure your product is a bit cleaner and it's not polluting, and your packaging is recyclable, all that stuff. But to somehow claim that you've got a kind of higher purpose than profit, I think is deceitful, actually.
Yeah, sorry, Tom, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but it's interesting because I love that distinction you made there. And I would argue, like, having purpose in an organization may provide more value for internal teams than it would maybe external. As a group or as an organization, hey, this is what we value. Here's our core set of principles. Here's where our core purpose really comes, and here's how we do it. Versus and really internalizing that and getting people aligned there. I think there's more value there perhaps than trying to put a campaign together and say, oh my goodness, look at this, we have a purpose. And it's, it may come across sometimes just like inauthentic.
No question. I think it has, if you're going to do it, it's got to be ideally like baked into your business model. In fact, it has to be, because you have to accept that you're going to do things that are going to cost you money and are going to make your product more expensive. Right. Exactly. And so you have to have a business model that is, if you're going to be purposeful, that accepts that it's a trade-off. Yeah. I know there are businesses that somehow manage to square the circle, but yeah, and you might have people that are particularly engaged by that. But the notion that purpose should just be an advertising thing is ridiculous. So that if you're in fact, this is a place where both Ritson and Bar and Shop do agree. But Bar and Shop believes that purpose advertising is just very unlikely to be distinctive. It's just going to look very samey. And I think we did see that a few years ago. Lots of very samey kind of advertising from brands sort of proclaiming their purpose. I suspect COVID kind of killed that off a bit. It seemed a bit off from what people needed from brands at the time. And now there's a more different kind of recession and cost of living crisis that's kicked in. I think it's probably not mostly on the agenda for brands to be doing that kind of communication. I think I hope it was just a phase. I mean, phases come and go in advertising. I think that was one. I think the awards people don't help. There's so many awards for this kind of work, and juries like it. Advertising juries, it somehow appeals. If you're locked in a room in Cannes for a week and you're not able to go out, and you're having to look at thousands of pieces of creativity, maybe there's something more compelling about the things that look like they're doing some good. So it's a contentious area, I know, but I generally come down on the side of do it if you're starting a business, but don't see it as an advertising thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know Peter Field had come up with that IPA database research on purpose. I remember watching the broadcast, and it was like, for all you that don't want to see purpose succeed, this slide is for you. And it was like, there's less business effects for purpose-led. But then there was interesting nuances within the data for companies that did it well versus companies that didn't.
Yeah. I mean, as often with those things, it seemed to come down to good advertising is good and works, and bad advertising is bad and doesn't, or works less well. I can't remember the specifics of. There was some controversy around that. I'm not going to stray into that one.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I also wanted to ask about, I mean, you mentioned something about like a purpose-led brand. Sometimes that costs you more. And so linking that back to some of the conversation, like Patagonia, let's say, that is, I would say, probably the best example of a purpose-led brand. The products cost more, and when they advertise, there's never a discount there in my mind. It's always about, here's the things that make this product great. And so they're communicating the value and the benefits of the product, not the price. And so it helps increase, I think, the willingness to pay for a company. So, there's inflation that's coming into play. We just had a conversation with Herman Simon talking about inflation and the impact of inflation. I just feel like there's so much need for us to talk about more than just decreases in price and optimizing for return on investment. And yet we end up so often looking at marketing as, what's the ROI on this investment? Long-winded way to saying, you've also written a ton of stuff about ROI.
Yes, I did it. I wrote something recently. It was basically rehashing. It was a kind of primer, like a 101 in some of the problems with ROI. It's a funny word because I think we mostly use it wrong. Most of the times you see it, if you see an article that is, what's the ROI on PR or what's the ROI on social media? What they're not actually saying is the technical definition of ROI. What they tend to be saying with those kinds of things is, what is the impact of, or how profitable is it? It's really important that you see the incremental profit or sometimes sales that your activity is generating first and foremost, and that is not actually ROI. ROI is a technical definition that is the incremental profit minus the cost of it divided by the total cost of the activity. And so what you've got there is a ratio, and ratios are more problematic. It's not, you can end up, if you're only looking at the profitability of something, you can end up getting distracted because, actually the reality is, and Les Binet says this a lot, is the best way to optimize ROI is to spend less. You'll have the highest ROI in the world if you spend less and less and less. So if you're only thinking about increasing technically what's correct is ROI, then you will spend less, or you'll fragment your spend across different channels. You won't actually spend more and get more profit in total. So that the first thing to say is optimizing for ROI. If technically you're talking about the correct definition of ROI, that's a problem because you will actually end up spending less. Mostly though, from a common sense point of view, most marketers aren't actually doing that. Mostly they see the difference. So I think when people talk about ROI, they often don't mean that. And so I think it's not as big a problem as sometimes people make out in articles about this. But nonetheless, it is a problem if you only care about ROI. But just as it is any particular metric, you need a you need a basket of metrics, a small basket of metrics. You need to work out what things really matter to you as a business and measure those. And primarily that should be profit, incremental profit, and ROI really should be a kind of check on the value you're getting from your activity, and something that you see as a kind of secondary measure, not the primary thing that you're focused on. And related to that, I talked recently about, wrote a thing recently about ROAS and how problematic that is. And I think that's a kind of, talked about ROI and ROAS being kind of evil twins somehow. And ROAS is the kind of digital evil twin of ROI. And it has its own problems. It shares the problems I've discussed on ROI, but ROAS in particular is often not what it's made out to be. Often it's just the sales that came in during the period that you were advertising, and from people that you showed advertising to in your ad tech partners and your platforms. So that's a problematic metric. If you obsess on ROAS, then you're gonna probably go wrong, because you will end up giving more credit to certain bits of your advertising ecosystem, your plan, and probably undervaluing some of your longer term things, which are naturally going to have a lower return on investment or lower ROAS. But you need to have a blend, you need to have a mix, you need to be doing things that are building those memories, and you need to be doing some things which are going to have a high ROAS, which convert. So it's back to this blend thing. And one of the problems with this whole thing is just how the platforms have led us to believe that their platform is better than the other. My platform has better ROAS than yours, and that's dumb, because it implies that it's a competition, when actually what we need to be seeing is how everything works together, rather than everything working against each other. It would, if you had a football team and you were only crediting your centre forwards with the success of the team, it would just be idiotic. Yeah, of course there are strikers that can win you games, but you wouldn't have 11 Mbappes on the field or 11 Messis. It wouldn't work. Well, 11 Messis might do, but mostly you'd probably go wrong if you tried to do that. But that's what's been happening. We've got some businesses have performance marketing people and brand marketing people, and they have different metrics. They don't speak to each other enough. They're not creating integrated communication. They're not making sure that things work together. They seem to be set up in opposition to each other rather than as a team. So that's I think a problem.
I really like that analogy, though. You can't just credit your center forward for being like the one that, essentially, and that's for a lot of digital channels. Search gets the credit for everything, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's some really good data actually from the UK. The study was just a really nice way of displaying the fact that TV and search often are a great combination. And both of those things can do long and short. TV does long and short really well. Search tends to do a bit more short and long. But get them working together, and it makes sense, because I think so often we talk about these things in isolation and in theory, and we actually forget that of course it makes sense, because I'm sat on my sofa, I'm watching TV, I may see a commercial, it tells me about some new thing or some new category, and I search it, and you've got this great path. Maybe not to purchase in that instance, but maybe certainly to finding out something. And you can see great search results coming off the back of TV campaigns, which really do show that the immediate impact of TV can be very strong sometimes.
Tom, when we talk about measurement effectiveness, we've covered a lot of ground. But from your perspective, like, what are kind of conversations we should be having? What are some of the balanced metrics that we should be looking at if we're going to really improve the way we're measuring effectiveness overall?
Yeah. I don't think any of this stuff is a great mystery, but somehow, particularly on the brand measurement side, people will say things like, it's really hard to measure brand, or it's really, really hard to see results from brand campaigns. And I'm sort of slightly baffled by that, because it's sort of not true. It's there are plenty of providers of brand health tracking, some better, some worse. There's some really good knowledge and understanding about how to measure what the Ehrenberg Bass Institute call category entry points, which, your association with particular moments where your brand, your category comes to mind when people are in the category. So get some basic brand tracking, brand health metrics in place. Make sure you've done the work actually in the first instance to understand what really matters. What is that path to purchase? What are the key things you need to measure on the way? Create a balanced scorecard, which will include some longer term metrics, some brand stuff. I'm a big believer in econometrics, so I will always advocate for good market mix modeling or econometrics by a decent provider. I think there's some not great stuff happening in that marketplace, but there's some good stuff happening. So get some econometrics. I'm really interested in share of search as a metric, which is an interesting new one. I'm particularly interested in that because it seems to be this kind of meeting point between brand people and more performance people. So I'll talk about share of search with clients, and some of them will be really interested in it and as ab metric, some interested in it from the perspective of brand advertising, and some and brand building, and some might be interested in it more as a measure of how their search activity is doing and how it's converting into traffic. So that's an interesting metric because it seems to bring people together from different schools or different parts of the marketing forest. So I like that one, and it tends to me to sit in the middle of a kind of balanced scorecard because it can help you understand the longer and the short term, and then some short term metrics as well. So to make sure you're measuring how you're converting the demand that you're generating with your brand building activity. So I'd advocate a balanced scorecard. With some brand stuff, maybe some share of search, some short-term behavioral metrics too, but never being overly reliant on one thing. I think that's probably the biggest problem is when people get obsessed with one number, and that of course could either be a longer-term number or a kind of short-term number or an ROI number. I think you need a blend. And you need people that really understand these things and understand how it all fits together. So I think it's not as hard as people make out. Obviously, costs. It's not free to measure stuff.
Right. No.
You need experts, and you need to believe in it as an important investment. But why would you spend on creating this demand and converting it if you're not actually also spending on how you're doing so that you can optimize and do better next year? I mean, that's the critical thing, I think. And I believe that stuff wholeheartedly. I was lucky that when I was kind of coming up through creative agencies, there was a big emphasis on, particularly in the UK, on the IPA Effectiveness Awards, which is kind of where I cut my teeth really in thinking about these things and making sure that these things were in place and making sure that it was kind of being looked at and being written up as a case study. I mean, the ultimate, the IPA Effectiveness Awards, yes, they're an awards program, but actually the benefit of looking at how your brand works from that perspective is you also get a brilliant understanding of how it all works together and how you tell that story and how you then internally at your clients kind of repeat the story about how it's working and make sure it's known that things are working as they should be or not. So that there's a benefit in those kinds of award schemes as a way of telling your story about your effectiveness of your campaigns.
It's a great answer.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't remember the original question, but
no, that's great. It's honestly, this is so like I love the way you think. I love the thoughtfulness you put into all the posts that you have, and
it comes from the writing.
Super appreciative.
I can only say these things because I've written them down.
Right.
So yeah, it's I'm very lucky that I've had employers that have been prepared to accept that some of my time will be spent writing this stuff. So that's good.
It's awesome. Tom, how can people find out more about you and what you're up to?
So I've got the blog, which is thetomroach.com. Most of the stuff on the blog these days first starts out as articles in Marketing Week. I don't know if you guys see Marketing Week, so predominantly UK marketing title. I tweet a bit, although not as much as I maybe used to. What else do? I do a lot of these kinds of things. So yeah, some more podcasts, I guess, is a common source of hearing the stuff I'm thinking and doing. I hope to be. I mean, the thing that I'm doing right now, which will, fingers crossed, be out sometime next year, is I want to write a book. Somebody wanted me to write a book, and I thought, well, like that seems like a big challenge and something that seems really daunting and scary. And so I'm going to try and do that. I tend to write really slowly, so I'm going to have to get quicker at writing. I tend to write about 2,000 words every other month. I'm going to have to write 80,000 words in 7 months or 6 months. So there is a title.
It's a bit of a ramp up.
That's a little.
It's a bit of a ramp up. I know that the quality of each individual word is going to go down. It has to, but we'll see. It's going to be called, we think, brand building in the platform world. So it's all of this stuff. It's about how you do this stuff today. It's about how you combine brand and performance. It's about how do you do this in a world where we don't have so much reliance on the 30-second TV spot, which is the kind of it's still there, it still works. It's just less dominant a part of the landscape that we've got, and it's less dominant part of the tools we've got available to us. So the book is intended to unpick some of that, and some of the things that I've talked about today will, I'm sure, in some shape or form, form parts of it.
Well, we'd love to bring you back to talk about it when it's ready.
Well, we'll talk to you in 2026 or something when it's done.
I hope it's not that long.
It's scheduled. My deadline is August, and it's scheduled for release in March 24. So let's see.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's awesome. You can't just tease us like that, man.
I tell people basically to make sure that I'm committed to doing it, because I know it's going to be hard.
Oh.
Speak it into existence.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it out yet? Is it out yet?
This has been great, Tom. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And now the post-pod discussion with V and Mark.
I don't know why every time I just want to just smile, because I know what's coming.
Post-pod. Here we go, V.
There it is.
We've got the matching hoodies, and we had Tom Roach, and this is amazing.
Agreed.
So we covered a ton of ground with Tom. We were just saying, I didn't think we were going to get through all our list of questions, and all of a sudden he answered everything.
Completely ratcheted things up.
It's amazing.
Completely.
Yeah. I mean, we covered, is there value in advertising, an open letter to CMOs to help justify brand budgets. We talked about difference and distinctiveness. We talked about purpose. We talked about ROAS and ROI, and then measuring things for real effectiveness. It was, it's not a small amount of list of
no, not at all. And I think what I was probably most appreciative of is just how open he was to talk about all of these. I don't know if our listeners have kind of seen a lot of his content, but it's just so well thought out, and it's quote unquote evidence based.
Yeah.
He does a great way to support his arguments. So, it was just incredibly, incredibly amazing just to have him on to kind of walk through some of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked to him about this afterwards. It's funny how we are so
UK heavy, let's call it. And all these people that we're bringing on, there's a lot of people in the UK that have a lot of thoughts and opinions. And so, yeah, for anyone listening that's in the US or Canada and we haven't picked up on it, like, let us know. Give us a note. But I mean, there's a ton of evidence that exists out there. So talking to a guy like Tom who synthesized a lot of it and put it all in one place is
I agree.
Fantastic. What were some of the highlights for you?
You know, I actually really enjoyed the conversation around like the difference in distinctiveness. You know, and maybe it's not that obvious to a lot of individuals or a lot of marketers, but I think from when you're really starting to think through, you know, and we've talked to Mary about this quite a bit as well. I know we've had her on a couple of times and then offline chats and whatnot. But there is a clear opportunity there to kind of really you know, I guess for your product and service is really distinguish, like, what are you actually going for? And there is an evolution to it as well. Like, you can start off being different, great, but then you have to build in that distinctiveness to kind of create, you know, that longevity. So I think I really loved how he doubled down on that and really kind of, you know, I think we peppered him with like 6 questions around that. So it's no, I really enjoyed that point of a conversation, to be honest. And then obviously like ROAS and ROI, I think that always strikes a chord. So those were kind of my 2 big ones.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah. The distinctiveness question or conversation was really interesting. I did ask podcast gone by, Jenny Romanek, about that. And I remember one line that she had, and I think Tom said something like it too, but you don't have to be different. You don't have to differentiate to compete. You can just be distinctive. And differentiation is often because of benchmarking and competitive intelligence and the need to, like, you know, do more of the same of what these guys are doing. Like, differentiation isn't always sustainable, but distinctiveness is. So I thought it was really interesting the way he was talking about it. It just reminded me of that. The value in advertising one I thought was really interesting.
We went down a rabbit hole there.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we did, but it's an interesting question because it's one of those things. Ultimately, it's one of those things that people question right away. You know, why are we spending this money and what are we doing with it? And I've been, you know, since all day I was thinking about that, and I think about it a lot, but in general, I was thinking about, specifically with following up on his conversation, I was thinking about that a lot. There's like a massive industry that's built behind this, and there's results built behind it. But I do think there's something to it with that strong versus weak force theory, in that there's an expectation in some minds that marketing is sales, and that sales can close deals today, and marketing can get deals to the table today. And they're different. And so I think there's, like, you know, that's that strong force theory, and the weak force theory is these nudges and stuff. And so I do think it's important to think about performance in a different way in using that weak force theory idea. Maybe it needs to be rebranded. Weak force theory.
No, it's a great point. Yeah.
But nudging people and then mental awareness, mental availability. I mean, there is something there, just as far as you kind of need to measure that stuff if you want to show value there.
And I think, like, as we were kind of, again, going through various questions there with him, you know, the one, I don't remember if it was you or I that brought up the, why did I just blank? Sometimes it's like the internal struggle that we have as marketers, right? To, you know, sell our craft, and you know, the idea that, you know, a lot of marketers just kind of stay focused on the one side of it, which is like the ad side. Unfortunately, when we cited Mary's, like, you know, data there that was what 25% of your brand awareness, your brand building activities only coming through.
Right. Oh yeah. You said
only comes up, you know, through the branding, through ads. The other 75% is across the other touch points. And I think as marketers, like, we're just too narrowly focused at times and not thinking about the broader scope of our responsibility. And it could be a byproduct of how we're organized or what the org structures look like. And I completely get that. But I think again, as a practitioner, you have to make sure that you're thinking about like all the touch points marketing can affect instead of just being that one. So it was just interesting, hearing his take on that as well, because, I know you and I may have these theories or these ideas, but it's like, well, does it resonate the same way as it maybe does in our heads? And it's good that it tracked. So I'll take that as a win.
Yeah, totally. This feels like one of those moments
we're
where
not crazy,
we're not crazy. flashing back to Roger Martin. I've had a thought something like that once. It's funny. Yeah, and the purpose one I thought was interesting too. Like, as a point of differentiation, a lot of companies do try and leverage purpose to, find value. I think, and I'm maybe misquoting Tom, but I think there is value in purpose from a point of view of employee engagement and alignment and that kind of thing. But I don't think it matters as much to the general consumer. Like, again, it's not, when it's kind of like the innovation thing where you can say we're out to save the pandas or something, but then somebody else goes, we're also saving the pandas.
So who's saving them better?
You know what I mean? Like like eventually someone's just gonna go, well, I just want a white t-shirt.
Totally.
Okay. Like I just need a white t-shirt, and great that you're saving pandas, but it doesn't really matter for me if I just need a white t-shirt.
I'm of the increasing opinion that it's what you said early on. This is more of an intrinsic or an internal organizational thing to keep people motivated, that the core purpose of the organization is more than just producing white t-shirts. It's also saving pandas in this case. And I think there's more value there, and really kind of keeping everyone aligned and keeping everyone like really excited about, how an organization may be thinking about sustainability, about all the others. I don't know at the end of the day how much consumers actually care.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a spectrum, right? There's some people that just want the cheapest thing and wherever they can find it. And then there's other people that want the most expensive thing, or maybe not even the most, let's say Patagonia is on the other end of the spectrum, where their purpose is totally built in every sort of stitch of their fabric. You know what I mean? And so they're different ends of the spectrum. I think there's room for all of it. I just don't know that every company needs to have a grand purpose.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and ultimately at the end of the day, you still need, I think Tom mentioned this too, you need the business model to support that, and the communication vehicle to be able to support that too. Because it can't just be about, discounting and that kind of stuff. You still need profit to achieve the purpose.
Actually, you just brought up something that sprung a thought. The whole idea about discounting and the disassociation with branding. While many marketers disassociate the two. It's like, well, if someone's, you're on sale, that's not branding, or that's not something that, that's a different team usually that's managing like the tactical elements, and it's not, quote unquote brand. And the fact that it's like you're still branding in that moment, you're still communicating on behalf of, the product or service. It is branding out there, right? And I think all too often it's like brand marketers want to sit on one side of the fence, say, hey, we just talk about these other things, big things. And then again, it's just not, that's where you lack or you lose some of that consistency across, across your marketing communication channels as well.
Yeah. I like, it's just such the ROAS ROI thing, kind of coming back to that discounting conversation too. Like, I know we had a huge list of questions there. He did an amazing job answering everything in advance almost. So, but it's also a fascinating one. Again, thinking about Herman, and we talked to him, the profitability is a big part of what makes companies work, which allows them to do things like invest in the purpose and and invest in their employees and do all those kinds of things. If you discount, you can't. But then you have this like thing in the back of your mind where if you are a performance marketer, you're looking at ROAS and ROI all the time. And I was trying to explain. I had class last night, and last class
got a week off now.
But
you
got a couple months.
Yeah, I'm still a little behind. Thanks,
but
man.
Sorry to rub it in.
This guy.
But like it was I was thinking about his point about it being a ratio. So it's, the profits divided by costs gives you your kind of ROI ratio. It's not exactly the formula he said, but it's something like that. And so, like if your denominator is your costs, one of the ways to increase your ROI is to cut your costs. So you naturally underinvest in some things. And to improve that even more, you would intentionally target people who you think are highly likely to buy today, which is not the whole market. It's just the people who are heavy buyers today. So it's kind of interesting because it leads you down a path almost, ROI and ROAS, that you think is a good thing, but it may not actually be a good thing at all.
It's not.
It's not a good thing.
And I don't know. I'm guilty of this. I'll be completely honest. And those who have worked with me would have known that I preached, obviously, earlier, the idea of maximize your ROAS, maximize some of those touch points, and just keep going, right?
Totally.
But the reality is,
like you and I both did, like Black Friday, and looked at our search keyword categories, and it totally evaluated throughout the day.
Yeah, and I remember we would create these win rooms, and we would, we have Google in the room, we have all these vendors in the room. It's like, where are we maximizing our ROAS? Well, here's the keywords. Throw some more money at that. Let's just let's go, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, I'm in the other room with Facebook and doing the exact thing. And they're both claiming credit for the deal.
At some point, we have to do a podcast around reporting. And how much, intent reporting, because again, I'm seeing this everywhere still, man. People and organizations are still using last click everywhere. But anyways, that's neither here or there right now. Let's just table that. But it'd be a great conversation. But all to say, be careful with ROAS. I think Tom put it as you can have it as a indicator, but it's not your primary indicator. Maybe it's your third or fourth. If you're trying to measure the efficacy of a campaign, look at some of those engagement metrics instead. And not the vanity metrics, but genuinely how are individuals engaging with the ads? What is that behavior from the ad to the website? Yeah. Think about dwell time or bounce rates, et cetera. Try to see those relationships a little bit around key audiences that you create versus thinking about, hey, well, here's the number that we're going to use. It's, 150% ROAS or whatever, and throw it up at the top and say, oh my God, we're amazing. Reality is it's very myopic thinking about it through that lens.
Mm-hmm. Now it may be Black Friday isn't the exception, because that is a day where that might make sense to do that. But it's interesting. The other one that he talked about, or he quipped about, is that even a word? Quip?
Sure, run with it, man.
That's a word.
You made it one.
Anyway, he talked about it. Amazon. Yeah. I thought that was interesting. Arguably the most data intelligent decision-making company on the planet, and they're running TV ads. They could just be running retargeting ads all the time.
I meant to ask him. They made Prime its own thing, Prime Days. Outside of a typical retail calendar, insert Prime Days, and they've made it a thing. You didn't do that without advertising.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
No. Yeah. 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 Actually, the Amazon is maybe we should find somebody from Amazon.
That'd be good, actually.
It's also an interesting one because, the Echo is, I don't know if it's going away or not, but I do remember a lot of ads for that. And so it doesn't mean that ads are going to fix a bad product. Like I've heard rumors that it's getting rid of echo. I don't know if it's true or not, but divesting in it maybe. The ads don't fix a bad product. You still need the product, and the product has to be good. Whether it's an experience or anything else, like you can't just win exclusively by ads, but it can definitely help amplify your chances of winning.
No, agreed. And we touched on Tesla as well, and I also like the way we kind of like gone around that conversation. It's like, has Tesla really done marketing? It's like, well, how do you define marketing in that context, right? When you have someone like Elon Musk, who has such an intense following, and he tweets and he talks about, isn't that advertising in a sense? He has his own organic reach, right?
Yeah. I mean,
it's insane.
Totally. I looked it up once and tried to figure out what it would cost to pay for the organic reach that he gets and on a tweet. I mean, I'm making it up now because I don't really remember the numbers, but you need like tens of millions of dollars to get, or hundreds of millions of dollars to get the same kind of reach just on a tweet that he does. So it's not a fair comparison. And like I agree with him. Like you can't put a Tesla in a rocket and live stream it. If you're a regular kind of person, like he just has access. I mean, he's the world's richest person, or was. So you've got ability and tools and assets that nobody else on the planet has. And so to say that they don't advertise, I agree. I don't think it's totally correct. I mean, when you and I were working at Check together, it was like PR had its own budget. Yeah. It was part of the marketing budget. Yeah. Content had its budget. Digital had its budget. TV had a budget. But PR had budget, and that was part of the marketing department.
Like it's externally advertising or messaging something of service for an organization. That for me is advertising. It's a different channel, agreed. Yeah. But it's still advertising. The moment you're even adding funds behind it, potentially amplifying it. Anyways, I digress. Like the idea of, because I did a research project for school around Tesla, and we're kind of looking around what is kind of like their marketing mix. So when you look at it through the traditional marketing mix, it doesn't follow a lot of that. Mm-hmm. So from a traditional marketing lens, it may not be exactly that, but at the same time, when you think about it in terms of more holistically, it is 100% exactly
communication.
100%.
Yeah.
Totally.
Like, are they getting their message out?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, even I saw a thing where Jay Leno drove with Speedster or Roadster or whatever it was that they had. I mean, that's like 100%. A total marketing stuff.
Isn't that an influencer campaign?
Yeah. Like that. Right. Yeah, exactly.
So
totally. I mean, he's just a big influencer, but yeah.
Anyways, I think I like seeing like both sides. You have one example was like Amazon on the opposite side potentially, when they don't need to, but then you have someone like Tesla who also quote unquote doesn't need to. Well, they probably need to more now than they've ever had because they're losing some of that first mover status.
Well, that's
exactly
the differentiation. Blah, blah, blah. Exactly. The differentiation versus distinctiveness, right? Like. They were totally different, and now Ford, like every manufacturer's got like stuff, and there's new ones even coming.
Rivian
or something like that. I saw the other day. Yeah. Other ones I've never heard of. I'm sure there'll be tons more. So that uniqueness that they had is eroding, and there's going to be more and more competition.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I was just going to say some of these other brands now that are legacy brands in the industry. So the Fords, the Chevys, the GM's, Dodge, blah, 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 blah. They already have a large loyal fan base, if you will, that, I know families that just buy Fords. I know families that just buy GM. So the moment that I believe, these car makers now are making these vehicles even more affordable, that's when like the shift happens, first movers, like the first people that bought Teslas, they're not your everyday people. Right. And there's a distinctiveness to say, oh my God, you have a Tesla. Ooh, you must be doing well. Right.
Yeah.
That's not the barrier to entry now has now been lowered. So now I can go buy one if I wanted one, right? And it's because now it's become mass.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think I heard that California is going to have electric vehicle only sales as I forget the year, but it's something like 2035 or something like that, which will make the market that much bigger instantaneously as soon as that happens, which introduces that much more competition from all these other vehicle manufacturers. And to your point, it'll drive down the costs and create a lot more competition. So that distinctiveness really will 100%. Matter a lot then. The differentiation doesn't matter as much then because it's harder
to be electric vehicles now. So that if that becomes the norm, that's no longer different. But what makes you now distinctive? And I still believe Tesla's built enough of a brand awareness right now. They could probably still take back share once they potentially reprioritize or launch something new. I still think there's a chance. It's not like they're not.
Oh no, they're
100%.
They're a big company. He's done some amazing things with that company.
Cannot discount it.
Yeah, but now I would say that probably what will happen is that their market share will dictate the loyalty, right? Because that's the duplication of purchase, or no, not that one. What's that law called again? MPD. And non-binomial distribution.
Own it.
Pattern, whatever. It's the one from the Ehrenberg-Bass. I can't remember. I got to remember those names. But the market share will dictate loyalty in a situation like that. So the larger the company,
there it is.
Double jeopardy law. That's the one. So the larger the company of market share that Tesla has and owns going into this period, the higher their repeat purchase. And so as more and more entrants enter the competitive set, then their market share will shrink, which will shrink their loyalty purchase patterns. But they still have a lot of loyal customers. It's just they'll have less of them. And then the new entrants with lower market share will have less customers and then less repeat customers.
The auto industry is going to be very, very fascinating to kind of watch over the next 10 years, how it adapts, how it transforms. You talked about Rivian. Does it just get bought out by a Ford or something at some point? And it just that technology. I just feel like it will eventually just come down to the major companies we have today.
Yeah.
It just.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. It's interesting because it's like a market being birthed in real time in our lifetime and seeing things happening in real time, like the evolution of an industry.
Fascinating.
It's fascinating.
Wonder if we can get somebody from that industry. That'd be kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dude.
All right, Pete. This is great.
It was amazing.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. And
adieu.
Until next time.
This is the first time we actually did it right.